Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 172. Shizun does not eat children. Due to the airwaves set off by the gun, the tribulation fire burned almost half of Linyi. Originally, the cultivators who had only come to attend the gathering fled in panic on their flying swords in all directions. However, the flames continued to chase after them. Countless cultivators who could not endure lost their spiritual energy. They were then defeated in the struggle against the flames and were devoured by it. Along the way, they flew past the villages close to the Rufeng sect in the upper cultivation world. These villagers were not aware of what was going on at all. When they saw the flames coming from the direction of the Rufeng sect, they dragged their families and tried to run away, but how could their legs escape from the lava-like tribulation fire? Father! Baba Baba! Everywhere they passed by, there were cries and shouts. Xue Zhenyang and the others had already expanded their weapons to the maximum, and it was full of ordinary people from the upper cultivation world. Madame Wang kept comforting them, "Don't cry, don't cry. Sit a little further inside. Be careful, hold on to each other, don't fall again." However, no matter how much the iron fan expanded, it could only expand so much. There were so many people in the villages that they couldn't save them all. Xue Zhenyang knelt at the front and leaned over to pull a crying child, but the moment he exerted his strength, the iron fan couldn't bear it and began to shake violently. He had no choice but to let go and watch the tear-stained face full of hope being thrown far away in an instant. Even a tough man like him couldn't help but wail, "Why? Why? Just because a single person is wronged, so many innocent people have to suffer with him?" Xue Zhenyang couldn't stop sobbing, tears rolling down his cheeks. Isn't this world chaotic enough? Aren't there enough people who have died in vain? Madame Wang's eyes were also red. She hugged the two rescued children tightly on both sides. After the parents of the two children put them on the iron fan, they couldn't get on in time and were swallowed by the tribulation fire in the end. The children kept crying. Madame Wang hugged them and kept stroking their hair. She wanted to comfort them, but she didn't know what to say. She looked back and saw that there were about 10 cultivators following behind them. Many cultivators had already been caught by the flames, and some had already fled in other directions. Chu Wanning and Mo Ran were not here. Her eyes were filled with tears as she silently prayed for the two of them to be safe. Not far away, the still unconscious Xue Meng was being carried by Zhang Shi. The firelight shone on his handsome face. Zhang Shi's gorgeous sword was not good at carrying heavy loads, so it hummed under his feet. Zhang Shi glared at Xue Meng in disgust. He had thought of throwing this brat down and burning him several times, but when he saw Madame Wang's pleading eyes on the iron fan, he still pursed his lips with a sullen face and didn't let go. Xue Zhenyang cried. He wanted to pull a younger child who he might be able to carry with him, but no matter how much he wanted to, the iron fan had reached the limit of its capacity. When he had let go of the child's hand, Xue Zhenyang was on the verge of collapse. He knelt there and curled up his body. He was heartbroken because of how weak he was. However, at this moment, a silver-red light flashed. Zhang Shi waved his hand. A light flashed in his sleeve and lifted the little girl, who Xue Zhenyang couldn't carry on his back, onto his sword. The exquisite and resplendent long sword, Sui Huang, hummed even louder. Zhang Shi didn't have a good temper. He lifted his leg and kicked it. He said sternly, "What are you shouting for? If you have the guts, stand still and wait for the fire to burn you." Sui Huang didn't make any noise anymore. It carried Zhang Shi and the other two people and silently flew forward. However, the slender sword hilt looked like it was going to break at any time. Zhang Shi flew to Xue Zhenjiang's side and glanced at him with disgust. He scolded, "What's there to cry about? If you can save her, then save her. If you can't, then so be it. Why do you have to act like that?" Madame Wang said, "Shikshan. What? Did I say something wrong?" Jiang Shi sneered. Although he was extremely handsome, the curve of his mouth was mean and vicious, making him seem particularly unreasonable. If you hadn't left with him and stayed in Guyuye, you wouldn't be so weak now. You can't even control your own sword. If you were flying on your own sword, your husband, a hero who cares about the common people, could have saved one more person. Madame Wang seemed to be stung. She suddenly lowered her head and slowly closed her eyelashes. She didn't say another word. In the opposite direction a distance away, Mo Ran's sword had also expanded to a great extent. Apart from Chu Wanning, it was also filled with ordinary people from the upper cultivation world whom they had managed to save. Those people trembled, tears and snot flowing on their faces. They stared blankly at their homes that were being swallowed by the sea of fire and razed to the ground. The flames reflected the sparkling tears in their eyes. They closed their eyes and cried. Under such a heavy atmosphere, Mo Ran remained silent and didn't say anything. He wasn't like Xue Zhenyang. He didn't make any unnecessary struggles. He knew that his sword couldn't carry any more people, so he averted his eyes and not look any more at the crying villagers under them. Up ahead is the sea. He frowned slightly. Shizun, where should we go? Can you make it to the Flying Flower Island? Flying Flower Island was the closest island to Linyi in the upper cultivation world. Mo Ran nodded and said, I can handle it, but I'm not familiar with the Eastern Sea. It'll take some effort to find it. Shizun, please keep an eye on them and wake them up. The sword is too crowded. If they fall asleep, I'm afraid they might fall off. Chu Wanning answered, sure. Mo Ran flew on the sword for more than 2 hours. When the sun rose from the horizon, they broke through the clouds and saw a medium-sized ring-shaped island on the sparkling blue sea. They had finally arrived at Flying Flower Island. Although this island was under the jurisdiction of the Rufeng sect, it was a remote area with few people living on it. Most of them were scattered fishermen who relied on the sea for a living. There was only one big family. They saw the huge fire at the Rufeng sect from across the rolling waves of the sea. They were anxious and didn't know what was going on. Many residents looked around in their yards, afraid that there might be strange phenomenon in the sky. They didn't dare to sleep that night. When dawn broke, they found that whatever happened didn't affect them. However, a group of people on a long sword landed on the damp beach. The leader was a tall and handsome man. There were some mottled blood stains on his cheeks. It was obvious that he had gone through a fierce battle. There weren't many cultivators on Flying Flower Island. The people who lived there were ordinary people. Therefore, they got scared when they saw the newcomer. They didn't know whether he was good or evil and why he was here. Aya, why are their faces so dark? Some people whispered while looking at the men, women, and children behind Mo Ran. They seemed to have escaped from the fire. Are they from Linyi? A sturdy fisherman gathered his courage and approached them. He asked, Are you from the Rufeng sect? I'm from Shi Shengpeak. Mo Ran handed the child in his arms to Chu Wanning. The child was too young and couldn't support himself. In order to keep him from falling off, Mo Ran carried him while flying on the sword. Something happened at the Rufeng sect. These are all residents of Linyi. The fire was too strong and the weight that the sword could carry was limited. I couldn't save too many people. It seemed as if he was talking to himself. When he looked up and saw the confused expressions of the fishermen, he realized that he had talked too much. How could these people from Flying Flower Island know about the fire and the sword flight technique? So, he pursed his lips and said gently, I'm sorry. I'll tell you what happened in detail later. He turned around and looked at the disheveled crowd behind him. Can you get them some food and water first? A child who had lost his parents was panic-stricken. He slowly moved to Mo Ran's side and reached out his small hand to grab the corner of his robe. Mo Ran lowered his head and touched the child's hair. He said to the fisherman, I'm really sorry to bother you. Most of the residents of Flying Flower Island were good people. Soon, someone brought tea and snacks for them to eat. Moran briefly told the whole story to the islanders. Those people couldn't close their mouths for a long time. They stared blankly at the flames on the horizon. The Rufeng sect was burned to ashes. Someone couldn't believe it. Sect leader Nangong passed away. Moran said, he didn't die. He ate a lingchi fruit and was taken to another place. What's a lingchi fruit? It's... Chu Wanning stood on the side and watched Moran slowly explain to the fisherman. However, he didn't step forward. He looked a little uncomfortable and his face was naturally tainted with the cold of frost. If he went forward to negotiate with the villagers, the result wouldn't be better than Moran's. In his arms, the sleeping child woke up. Seeing that the person holding him was a strange man, he couldn't help but be stunned. Then, the child burst into tears. He wasn't as obedient as when he was in Moran's arms. Chu Wanning glanced at Moran. Seeing that Moran was still surrounded by the villagers and couldn't get away, he felt a little helpless. He habitually said to the child with a stiff face, "Don't cry." However, the child began to cry even louder. He continued to shout, "Daddy, Mommy. I want Daddy, I want Mommy. Don't cry." Chu Wanning stiffly coaxed, "You, don't cry." "What? Mommy. Mommy." Chu Wanning didn't have a choice. He held him with one hand and raised his other hand to stroke his hair. Unexpectedly, the child didn't want him to touch him. He tilted his head back. His bright red little face was full of tears and snot. "I want Mommy, I want Daddy, I want to go home." He was really at his wit's end. Chu Wanning had never pacified a child before, so he didn't know what to say. He couldn't help but think about what he should say to comfort this little boy. However, as soon as he sank into deep thought, his eyebrows unconsciously furrowed, making him look cold and stern. The child was crying uncontrollably. While kicking and struggling, he suddenly saw Chu Wanning's expression and choked. He was so frightened that he couldn't say anything. He only bit his lip and tears rolled down his cheeks like a broken string of beads. Chu Wanning suddenly thought of something. He opened his kinkin bag with one hand and took out a piece of glutinous rice candy. He peeled off the candy wrapper and handed it to the child. With tears in his eyes, the child made a funny sobbing sound. He looked at Chu Wanning and then looked at the candy in his hand. Since he was young, his mother had told him a lot of stories to convince children to be obedient. Among those stories was about how ferocious and terrifying cultivators would use candies to put disobedient children to sleep in order to capture them and refine them into immortal pills. The child silently held back his tears and stared at him. Suddenly, the little boy became extremely terrified. Chu Wanning didn't know what could this possibly meant. He stared blankly back at the child while still holding the piece of glutinous rice candy in his hand. Although Chu Wanning's phoenix were pretty, when he wasn't smiling, his gaze held a look of arrogance and disdain. Sometimes, even if he was smiling, his eyes would have a bit of wild aura like rose thorns, containing frustration and haughtiness. Most people could not bear this kind of arrogance. Therefore, although Chu Wanning's face was handsome, he was innately unpopular to most people. He was even more unpopular with children. Eat it? When he was on the sword, he saw how Moran used candy to appease some of the children. He was doing the same thing, but he didn't understand why it didn't work. The child pursed his lips. He hesitated, trembled, and then slowly shook his head. He didn't want to be refined into an immortal pill. You. Before he could finish speaking, the child reached his limit and cried out in fear. He cried so hard that his whole body shook as his chest heaved with how hard he was crying. It caught the attention of those around them and so they turned to look at their direction. Chu Wanning didn't react. He was still holding the piece of glutinous rice candy in his hand and said in a low voice, "It's quite sweet. He wanted to say that the candy was sweet, but the child connected the "you" he said halfway, so what he seemed to be have heard was "you're quite sweet." After pondering about it for a while, he felt that this cultivator was definitely going to use him to refine immortal pills. Moreover, he was going to refine him into a very sweet immortal pill. He was so scared that he started to wail and cry even more fiercely. Chu Wanning froze. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 173. Shizun, someone wants to kick us out. He felt like he was holding a hot potato. He didn't know what to do. Seeing more and more people looking his way, the tips of his ears couldn't help but redden in embarrassment. At this moment, a pair of hands reached over and took the child from his arms. Chu Wanning breathed a sigh of relief and turned around. Mo Weiyu. Yes. Mo Ran moved the child to one of his arms and held him while with his other free hand, he ruffled Chu Wanning's hair. His expression was calm and collected. Probably because of the miserable scene he had witnessed in Linyi, Mo Ran was feeling depressed. There was a faint trace of melancholy between his eyebrows, but when he looked towards Chu Wanning, he wanted to curl up the corners of his mouth so as not to show him an ugly expression. His expression when he was forcing a smile was not as handsome as usual, but it made people feel inexplicably warm. Have you finished talking to the people on the island? Yes, I've talked to them. I'm afraid the fire in Linyi won't be extinguished for at least 4 or 5 days. Before that, we have to stay here on Flying Flower Island. There aren't many houses on the island and we brought so many people. I asked the village chief. He said that we can still stay here if we squeeze in. It wasn't wrong to let Mo Ran handle this kind of problem. He knew better how to communicate with people, his appearance was also much better and so on. Thinking back to when he had helped in Yuliang village during the harvest season, the way the ladies in the village looked at him, he knew that he was more likable than himself. Chu Wanning pondered in silence for a while, not knowing exactly what to feel. And so, he just nodded and said, "Thank you for your hard work." Shizun don't need to say that to me. Mo Ran looked at the candy in his hand and understood. He turned to the child in his arms and smiled, "And you? Why are you crying?" "I want mama. I want daddy." Mo Ran saw that the child was still so young and couldn't walk, but his parents died in the fire and couldn't come back. He couldn't help but feel sad. He rubbed his forehead against the child's face and comforted him in a low voice. "Your daddy and mama have something that they have to do. It will take some time before they can come and be with you. For the meanwhile, you have to be good. Only when they see you being obedient will they be happy." He hugged and comforted the child for a while, and the child gradually calmed down. Although he was still sobbing, he didn't shout and wail at the top of his lungs anymore. Mo Ran looked down at the child with tears on his eyelashes while Chu Wanning stood quietly beside him, looking at him while still holding that candy in his hand. This man's profile was very good looking. His features were strong and straightforward. If one were to draw him in ink, his face would be like a willow leaf. The strokes would be powerful and vigorous, and the ink lines would be tall and straight. It was easy to depict his handsome face as though his edges were sharp, his eyes were soft just like how the spring leaves spread. Thus, when Mo Ran poked his head over and bit the candy on his finger, Chu Wanning suddenly retracted his hand. He opened his eyes in shock and asked, "What are you doing?" The glutinous rice candy was so small. When the man's head came close and quickly took it, his lips naturally touched the tip of his finger. The warm and wet tip of his tongue even accidentally licked his finger. Chu Wanning only felt his whole body go numb. That quick and small intimate contact was enough to make his spine itch. It was like a new sprout bursting out of a seed, pushing away the silent soil and opening itself up to the bright sun. Mo Ran held the candy in his mouth and smiled at him. He turned his head and winked at the child. He raised his head and rolled the candy into his mouth. The jut on his throat bobbed, and then he said to the child, "Look, it's not some scary pill. It's just candy. Chew Wanning." His mind was wandering just now, so he didn't pay attention to what the child and Moran were talking about. At this time, his gaze fell on the child again. The child stared at Moran for a while. After a while, the boy whispered in surprise, "Ah, it's really candy." "Yes," Moran said with a smile, "this cultivator brother is so nice. Why would he catch you and refine you into immortal pills?" Chew Wanning. Because too many terrifying things had happened the night before, Moran didn't feel sleepy. By the time that they have settled down, the men, women, and children that had been rescued, the sky was already bright. He walked to the beach of Flying Flower Island alone. In the morning, the coastline would recede far away, revealing the beach that couldn't be seen during high tide. When he was alone, a lot of thoughts surged up in his mind which shrouded his eyes, forming a layer of haze that he couldn't get rid of. He took off his shoes and walked slowly along the coastline, his footprints leaving 2 lines of crooked tracks on the sand behind him. The fact was, there were still many things about Su Xuanglin that he didn't understand. For example, why that man didn't like to wear shoes even on such a cold day. Thinking about it, the man seemed to prefer walking barefoot all the time. Moran was a person who hid a lot of his past and was used to be treated unkindly by others. Perhaps because of his own experiences, he could understand how Su Xuanglin did not care about anything in his single-minded pursuit of destroying the Rufeng sect, ruining the Jiangdong Hall and throwing the entire upper cultivation world in chaos. Being oppressed and excluded wasn't the most painful thing in the world. The thing that hurt the most was being betrayed by someone close to you. The most painful thing was that even though you didn't do anything wrong, even though you painstakingly developed a spell, and yet during the most important Lingshan Sword Conference, you were criticized and accused of stealing the very same spell you have developed from your own elder brother. How could one recover after such ridiculous situation? Moran knew that after this calamity, the whole cultivation world would definitely face an upheaval. For those sects whose reputation was damaged or have lost too much disciples due to the incident, they would all claim that Su Xuanglin was really a madman. Perhaps only Mo Weiyu, who used to grind his teeth in bloodlust and kill people like flies, would be able to stop himself from thinking like them and sincerely ponder the situation as he quietly walked along this long and lonely coastline. Su Xuanglin, what kind of person was he really? This man, when he was young, was he also high-spirited and vigorous? Did he arduously practice his swordsmanship in that orange grove until late at night and would only return back once he was tired and satisfied? Did he return with some freshly picked oranges to bring back to his lazy older brother to eat? Not knowing that at that time, his unaccomplished older brother was using his sweet-talking tongue to plot his downfall in the cultivation world. Did this madman also bury himself in incantation scrolls and meditate? Did he seriously dip the brush into the ink to write down his untested ideas, then thinking them unsatisfactorily, would bite onto the brush shaft and once again sunk into deep thought? Also, at that time not knowing that no matter how much tried, the ending that was waiting for him was a ruined reputation with no hope of recovery at all. Moran closed his eyes. The sea breeze blew against his face. The sunlight fell on his eyelashes, gilding them with a layer of gold. He thought of the sands hung courtyard which have the meaning of one drink of menpo soup and one would forget the events of 3 lifetimes. Su Xuanglin gave this name to the place where he lived. Was that name picked out on a whim? There was also the matter of his previous life. In the lifetime, Nangang Su should have been hiding in the Rufeng sect under the guise of Su Xuanglin for the purpose of revenge, yet in that lifetime he died in the battle to save Ye Wangzi. Ye Wangzi. This name was also given to her by Su Xuanglin. What did he want to forget? Had he ever tried to forget those unjust and unfair matters that he had been subjected to? Did he want to forget the hatred and the glory of the past, to forget those ugly faces of the people who ridiculed and wronged him? There was also the corpse that Su Xuanglin had painstakingly dragged out from the infinite hell, Luo Fenghua's corpse. What did he want this corpse for? In the illusion, Su Xuanglin told Nangonglu that only by obtaining the spiritual core of the person who cast the curse could the curse on the ring be completely broken. But judging from the final result, Su Xuanglin's real purpose was definitely not to help Nangonglu break the curse. The heavenly rift, the Zhenlong chest formation, the rebirth technique. There was also the hand that stretched out from the space rift in the end. Mo Ran faintly felt that something was very wrong. He frowned and pondered more. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. He recalled one thing. That year beside the Jinqinj lake, when the old dragon Wanjiu died, he said, that mysterious person used the power of the Zaixin Lu to activate two forbidden techniques, one was the rebirth technique and the other was the Zhenlong chess formation. At that time, he did not mention the time and space gates of life and death. In other words, Su Xuanglin's interest was only towards the rebirth technique and the Zhenlong chess formation. Needless to say that the Zhenlong chess formation was for the convenience of doing things by controlling chess pieces. Then what about the rebirth technique? Who did he intend to use the rebirth technique for? Mo Ran thought about it and felt that there were two possible answers. One was Rong Yan, and the other was Luo Fenghua. According to Su Xuanglin's words, the person that Rong Yan had once loved was actually him. Later for some reasons, she ended up marrying his elder brother. However, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it should not be her. If Su Xuanglin really liked Rong Yan and wanted to resurrect her, why did he kill her only son in the previous life? More importantly, this guy had been lurking around Nangonglu for a long time as Elder Xuanglin. If he wanted to use the rebirth technique to resurrect Rong Yan, why didn't he directly stop her from being sacrificed at the Jinqinj lake in the first place? So, it couldn't be Rong Yan. Mo Ran turned his head and looked at the sea that looked as if it was dyed red by the rising sun. The waves continued to spread and surge. The tide was rising with the rise of the sun at a speed visible to the naked eye. Between heaven and earth, there was a golden brilliance. It has to be Luo Fenghua. Mo Ran was almost certain that the person that Nangong Su wanted to resurrect was Luo Fenghua. The matter of the Rufeng sect was not as simple as it appeared on the surface. It was just like the rise and fall of the tide. Those broken shells and dangerously colorful starfish were all covered by the rolling waves at daybreak. The sea water was rising very quickly. The fine sand and stones were being washed away by the waves, spreading to the beach where he was walking. Suddenly he felt a chill under his feet. Mo Ran lowered his head. The waves had already surged up and slapped the backs of his feet. Whoosh! He moved his toes and felt a little cold. He turned around and wanted to walk back to the beach to put on his shoes. But when he turned his head, he saw Chu Wanning walking towards him from the red clouds filling the sky. Chu Wanning was wearing the usual indifferent expression on his face. With one hand, Chu Wanning picked up the shoes and socks that he had casually thrown on the sand and handed them to him. "Why are you barefoot? It's such a cold day." Mo Ran followed him to the top of the sand slope and sat down on the rocky shore. He shook off the sand on his feet and put on his shoes again. He suddenly felt somewhat relieved. Although he was destined to never obtain the kind of love he wanted from Chu Wanning in this life, Chu Wanning was still the best Shizun in the world. He would always care about him and take care of him. Seeing him walking around barefoot, he would worry that he would catch a cold. What do you think of the matter about Rufeng sect? It's not that simple. I supposed so. Chu Wanning's brows had almost never relaxed since last night. Even though there was a brief moment of peace and tranquility, the space between his eyebrows was still dyed with melancholy. He watched Mo Ran put on his shoes and socks, then he turned his gaze back to the boundless sea. The rising sun from the sea level burned a dazzling golden red. Far in the distance, the unextinguished fire in Linyi intertwined, making it difficult to distinguish the two. It's really hard to find out where Su Xuanglin was pulled to by the space-time rift. Chu Wanning said, If he deliberately doesn't want to be discovered, I'm afraid no one will be able to catch him for 8 to 10 years. Moran shook his head and said, I don't think he would be able to hold back for 8 to 10 years. After he recovers his energy, I reckon he would make some moves. What do you mean? Moran told Chu Wanning his conjectures and hypothesis. Then he said, that corpse of Luo Fenghua's was not a real body but an artificial limb that was cultivated in the infinite hell. After leaving the ghost realm and without the support of yin energy, that body will fester and decay quickly. So, I guess he has a year at most. Even if he's not fully prepared, he would have to make some new moves. Chu Wanning didn't say anything. He had always been cautious and prudent when doing things or thinking about things. When it came to this kind of uncertain matter, he wouldn't make bold assumptions like Moran. But it didn't hurt to listen to Moran's assumptions. What about that hand that pulled him? Chu Wanning asked, what do you think about that person who took Nanggong Su away in the end? Moran shook his head, I know too little about the foremost forbidden technique, so it's hard to say. I have no idea. This sentence was not true. Although Moran didn't want to lie to Chu Wanning, there were some things that he really couldn't openly tell him. More accurately, he didn't dare to say them. Truly, as far as he could remember, he had very few peaceful days. Even if he added up his 2 lifetimes, it wouldn't exceed a year. A person who had been wandering for decades was suddenly asked to sit down by a bonfire and was given a pot of hot tea. How could he bear to get up and leave again? How could he bear to shatter this good dream with his own hands? Thus, he could only say that he didn't know. But in his heart, he was restless. He was almost certain that the owner of that hand was not so simple. Otherwise, why didn't Su Xuanglin in his previous life collect the 5 great spiritual bodies so quickly and wantonly slaughter them? If it wasn't for someone who had been reborn inciting and persuading him, according to the normal course of events, Su Xuanglin shouldn't have thought about how to resurrect Luo Fenghua at this time. What's more, when Su Xuanglin controlled the white chess piece at Jinchinj Lake, he said to Chu Wanning, if you think that I'm the only one in the world who knows the 3 forbidden techniques, then I'm afraid you won't live for long. Moran felt that Su Xuanglin definitely knew that some people who shouldn't have existed in this world had come to this world. But at the same time, he also felt that although Su Xuanglin knew that there were people who had been reborn in this world, he didn't actually know that he was also one of those people. Otherwise, during the fighting in Rufeng sect, why didn't he expose Moran as Taxian Jun? If he had any memories of Taxian Jun to show in the memory scroll that had been activated by the tribulation fire, then no matter how good Chu Wanning treated him, Chu Wanning probably wouldn't want this disciple anymore. Then everything would be over and he, Mo Weiyu, would never have the chance to recover from that. Why didn't Su Xuanglin do this? There were 2 possibilities. First, for some reason, he couldn't do so. Second, he actually didn't know. But no matter what the situation was, Moran was at a disadvantage at this moment. He had too few clues in his hands. If the other party was careful and didn't expose any hint, then he could only stand in the open and wait for the cold knife to stab him in the back at any time. Moran pursed his lips, his thick eyelashes drooping and trembling slightly. He couldn't care so much. In his previous life, he lived in hatred and acted selfishly, and did all kinds of outrageous things. In this life, no matter what the outcome was, he wanted to do his best to live well every day. He wanted to do his best to make up for those he wronged. He wanted to do his best to protect his Shizun, Shimei, Xuemeng and protect Shi Shengpeak. He would try his utmost to keep the warmth that he had so desired. Just as he was lost in thought, one of the fishermen suddenly rushed over and shouted to Moran and Chu Wanning, "This is bad. Cultivation masters, something happened." Moran was shocked. He supported himself with his arms on the ground and immediately jumped up, asking, "What's wrong?" The leader of Flying Flower Island who sailed out to the sea a few days ago had just came back this morning. She, she heard from the village chief what happened and was very dissatisfied with the village chief's handling of the situation. She got mad and refused to let the refugees live in the empty house, even the elderly and the children. At this moment, she has already chased everyone out. The people you brought are all standing outside. This fisherman was kind-hearted. As he spoke, his eyes became moist. They look really pitiful. It's so cold, but she didn't even want to give them clothes and blankets. The leader also said. Chu Wanning also stood up with a gloomy face. What else did she say? She also said that, those people from Linyi who had eaten food and drinks here in Flying Flower Island must pay for them. If they didn't pay up, she would capture them and use them as slaves in the island. Before the fisherman could finish his statement, Chu Wanning had already become furious. His moon-white robe fluttered as he rushed towards the village in the center of the island. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 174. Shizun Sachet. Although Flying Flower Island was poor, the leader of the island obviously knew how to make money and lived a very prosperous life. She was wearing a bat-patterned golden satin robe and a snow gauze robe of top quality made from the Taxu Palace of Kunlun Mountain. Her long black and white hair was tied up in an extremely glossy bun adorned with jade beads. Her eyebrows were thickly drawn with the finest conch, and her lips slightly red. Around her neck was a pearl necklace with a warm texture, and 2 golden earrings inlaid with rubies the size of pigeon eggs hung from her ears, tugging heavily on her earlobes. She was a woman in her 50s and her youthful beauty was long gone. Her body was slightly bloated and her face was full of wrinkles. It would be fine if she deliberately dressed up, but she obviously thought that the more luxurious things she wore, the more beautiful she would be. So, instead, she was trapped in this pile of glittering pearls and jade, like an old turtle wearing red and green. This old turtle owned half of Flying Flower Island and the village chief didn't dare to say anything when she spoke. At this moment, the sun rose, and the old turtle with red flowers and green leaves came to the square slowly. She sat in the red rosewood bat deer chair that was prepared for her, and looked at the refugees from Linyi. Why did you accept them? She opened her heavy and oily eyes and glanced at the village chief. They haven't even paid, so why did you give them a room to live in? How about the food? How much did they eat? Not much. It's all leftovers in the village that they can't eat anymore, the village chief murmured. The old turtle snorted and said, they still have to pay. Didn't the rice and wheat come from my son Sunyang's land? This year's harvest wasn't good, so I opened the warehouse to give 10 kilograms of barley flour and a pot of oil to every family on the island. I don't mind giving you food since we're all family, but I'm afraid it's not good for you to use my food to help the refugees in Linyi, right? The madam is right, the village chief said with an apologetic smile. But look, these little children and old people are so pitiful in this cold weather. You're so kind, so why don't you just let it go? The old turtle stared at him. How can I let it go? Money, it's all about money. Village chief. How much did each family feed them? Old turtle asked. I asked you to record it. Did you record it? Village chief had no choice but to say, yes, it has been recorded. As he spoke, he handed a booklet to Sun Sunyang. Sun Sunyang raised her right hand and 9 colorful bracelets appeared on her right wrist. They were made of gold, silver, jade, and all kinds of gemstones, covering almost half of her forearm. Right. She lazily finished looking through the accounts book, opened the box, counted with her fingers and said, you people are really pigs. You can really eat. In such a short time, you've already eaten 26 steamed buns on the island. Our steamed buns are big and sturdy, so it's not too much to charge you 90 silvers. In addition, you drank half a vat of fresh water, which I brought back from Linyi. Linyi sold me 3 gold per vat, so I had to take into account the travel expenses, so I sold it back to you for 4 gold per jar. Half a jar is 2 gold, so that's a total of 2 gold and 90 silver. By the way, Sister Zhang. The kind-looking woman who was called trembled and hurriedly raised her head. Ah, third madam. Sun Sunyang smiled. Your steamed buns are the best. When you knead the dough, you put lard inside. You have to account for it. This, 10 steamed buns only need a grain of lard the size of a pea. How could you calculate this? Why not? 10 steamed buns will produce a grain of lard the size of a pea. After conversion, I charge you 1 copper coin. It's not too much. So it's 2 gold, 90 silver, and 1 copper coin. Sun Sunyang said, in addition, you slept in the house on my land. Although the house is not mine, the land is mine. You slept for a total of 1 hour, so the fee for 1 hour is 70 copper coins per person. She turned to ask the steward next to her. How many people are there in total? In reply to third madam, there are 49 in total. That's not right. Didn't you say 51? What about the other 2? Before she finished speaking, a gloomy voice suddenly said, they're here. Although Chu Wanning was not wearing a white robe, but a deep moon white robe, he still had a divine and frosty aura surrounding him. His pair of slightly upturned eyes were clear, but they were cold and arrogant, like sharp unsheathed bayonets. Sun Sunyang was an ordinary person, but when she saw cultivators, she did not fear them. She had been making a living for most of her life. Although she would nitpick and haggle over the smallest details, she did not commit any crimes. Therefore, she said unhurriedly, so you were cultivators. No wonder you don't need to sleep. These people were saved by you, right? You came at the right time. Hurry and pay up. The village chief said in a low voice, third madam, these 2 are not from the Rufeng sect. They are cultivation masters from Shi Sheng Peak. You don't have to. I don't care which sect they are from. I only recognize money, not people. Chu Wanning glanced at the refugees who were huddled together and shivering from the cold. He raised his hand and cast a golden red barrier to dispel the cold. Then he turned his head and asked, how much do you want? 2 gold, 93 silver, and 430 copper. Although Sun Sunyang was disgustingly overcharging them, they had nowhere else to go. Chu Wanning knew that if he offended her, he would implicate the people he brought with him. Therefore, although his complexion was very bad, he still took out a money pouch from his kinkan bag and threw it to her. There's about 80 gold inside. Most of his money was with Shui Zhenyang, so he did not have much left. We need to stay for about 7 days. Count it and see if it's enough. It's not enough. Sun Sunyang would not do it herself. She handed the money pouch to her subordinates and let them count it on the side. 80 gold is only enough for you to stay for 3 days at most, and it doesn't include food. If the cultivation master is not convinced, we can show you the complete breakdown. A businessman knows how to calculate money. I can tell you the reason for every transaction. At this time, Mo Ran also rushed over. He did not have much money on him. Together with Chu Wanning, it was barely enough for 52 people to eat and live for 4 days. Sun Sunyang put away the money and smiled with her bright red lips. I'll let you stay for 4 days. After 4 days, if you don't have any more money to pay, I won't care if the fire in Linyi is extinguished or not. You have to leave immediately. In order to save money, Chu Wanning did not eat that night. He threw a Haitang communication into the river and tried to get in touch with Shui Zhenyang. Then, he returned to the small house he was temporarily staying in. This house was more simple and cruder than the one he stayed in during the harvest season in Yuliang village. There were not many rooms on the island, so everyone had to squeeze together. Chu Wanning was not used to sharing room with strangers, so he could only share room with Mo Ran. At this time, the light in the room was on, but Mo Ran was not there. He did not know where he went. Chu Wanning took off his outer robe. Although the robe looked luxurious, the material was not better than the white clothes he usually wore. It was stained with ashes and blood from the fire. He poured a wooden bucket of hot water and was about to wash it when the door opened. Chu Wanning looked up and glanced to the direction of the door. "Where did you go? You're back so late." Mo Ran entered the house and brought back a bamboo lunch basket. The wind was a little strong outside and it was very cold. He put down the bamboo basket in his arms and looked up. The tip of his nose was red from the cold. He smiled and said, "I went to Sun Sunyang's house to beg for food." Chu Wanning was stunned. "You went to beg for food?" "I was joking." Mo Ran said, "I brought some food back." "What food?" "Steamed buns." Mo Ran was a little embarrassed. There was also a bowl of fish soup and a bowl of braised pork. Unfortunately, there was no dessert. That Sun Sunyang watched everything like a hawk. Everyone in the village was afraid of her. No one dared to give me anything, so I went to her house to find her. I took a silver dagger that I always carried with me and exchanged it with her. Chu Wanning frowned. "She's too black-hearted. I know that silver dagger of yours. There are spirit stones embedded in it. Why did you exchange it for so little?" "It's not just that. I bargained with her and exchanged it for 52 portions. Everyone has one. I watched the kitchen send it out." Mo Ran said with a smile, "So Shizun, you don't have to worry about others. Just eat your portion accordingly." Chu Wanning was really hungry. He sat at the table and drank a few mouthfuls of hot fish soup. Then, he picked up a steamed bun and began to eat with the braised pork. Sun Sunyang was quite stingy. She didn't give much meat and most of it was fatty. Chu Wanning didn't really like to eat it, but the steamed bun dipped in the meat sauce tasted pretty good. He ate one, then the second. Mo Ran glanced at the steaming water bucket and asked, "Shizun, are you going to wash your clothes?" "Yes. It's just a robe." "I'll help Shizun wash it." "No need. I'll do it myself." Mo Ran said, "It's fine. I was just going to wash my own robes, so I'll wash them both at the same time." As he spoke, he went to the bed and picked up the clothes that he had taken off. Then, he carried the wooden bucket and walked out. The moon was shining brightly in the courtyard. Mo Ran looked up and wondered how Xuemeng and Uncle were doing. He wondered where Ye Wangzi and Nangongzi had gone. He looked at the tribulation fire on the other side of the sea. It was still flowing like a tide of blood, burning day and night. Song Kaiyutong, and, that person he hated to the bone in his previous life, and the reason why he slaughtered the entire Rufeng sect. They were probably already buried in the sea of fire. Mo Ran sighed and stopped thinking about it. He put down the wooden bucket and mixed some cold water in it. Then, he rolled up his sleeves and began to wash his clothes. Mo Ran knew that Chu Wanning was the kind of person who, if he was making golems or writing scrolls, he would be methodical and meticulous. However, when it came to washing and cooking, he was always a mess. For example, before Mo Ran completely immersed his clothes in the water, he would habitually check his kinkan pouch and his secret pouch in the robes first, in case anything important got into the water. However, Chu Wanning often forgot to do this step. Mo Ran fell silent as he looked at the pile of things that he found in Chu Wanning's robes. "What are these?" "Hating embroidered handkerchief." Fortunately, it wasn't spoiled. "All kinds of medicinal pills." It seemed these are also fine and not spoiled. "A handful of candy." Mo Ran was speechless. He took a closer look and realized that it was the milk candy that he had bought for him in Yuliang village. "Haven't you finished this yet?" As he continued to catalogue the things he found in Chu Wanning's robes, Mo Ran was shocked. "Explosive talisman?" Mo Ran's face turned green. He held the half-soaked talisman in his hand. It was already wet, which terrified him. How brazen Chu Wanning was. How could he carry the explosive talisman on his body without any restrictions? Although the possibility of accidentally igniting the talisman and causing it to explode was very low, this was still too dangerous. This is no joking matter? Moran frowned and hurriedly checked his clothes from top to bottom. He cleared out all the explosive talismans, freezing talismans, and soul-subduing talismans. He even found that the rising dragon talisman with a small dragon drawn on it had also been carelessly left behind by Chu Wanning. If he didn't check out the first robes, these talismans would all go to waste, and most of them would be useless. Chu Wanning was really. Moran shook his head helplessly and said to himself, in the future, I can't let Shizun wash his clothes by himself. While he was thinking, a small, lotus-white object suddenly slipped out of the secret pocket of the robe. Moran wasn't keen on it, thinking that it was some kind of spell or talisman. He casually picked it up and glanced at it. However, after that single glance, he got stunned. It was an old brocade pouch embroidered with acacia flowers. The petals and leaves had lost their color and were no longer as bright as they were before. He was somewhat puzzled and got a little lost in thoughts. He vaguely felt that this thing was very familiar. He must have seen it somewhere before, but it had been too long, so he couldn't remember it at the moment. Moran rubbed this small brocade pouch, his dark brows tightly knitted, and his eyes flashed with an uncertain light. The past quickly flowed past one by one. He tried to find the source of this blooming acacia flower in the rapid flow of time. The light and slightly cool cloth, the color that had faded over time. He held it in his hand and looked at it carefully, turning it over and over, but the memory eluded him. He was worried that there was some kind of dangerous item like the explosive talisman inside, so he opened a small hole and took a look inside. It was a strand of hair. No, when he looked more carefully, it was actually two strands of hair. They were tied together, entangled together, like an inescapable net, tightly fitting together. In the hurriedly passing time, they had always been entangled, accompanying each other. At first glance, one would think that they were a single bundle, but in fact, these two black strands had long been inseparable. Hair. Moran was in a daze, and a little wisdom flashed in front of his eyes. He muttered, brocade pouch, acacia embroidered brocade pouch. Suddenly, he remembered something from the past. Immediately after, that matter exploded in his heart like a flame, burning his chest until it was on fire. His eyes instantly widened in shock. The ghost mistress. He remembered. The golden boy and girl, Kide Town, made a toast, tied a knot, cut hair as an oath of alliance. He remembered. From then on, two lonely souls would accompany each other, never to be separated from each other. He remembered. He remembered. In Kide Town, in front of the master of ceremony, when he and Chu Wanning were married in a ghost wedding, the golden boy and the golden girl cut two strands of hair for them, kept them in the acacia embroidered brocade pouch and handed it to Chu Wanning. It was this brocade pouch. How could it be? Moran's mind was buzzing as blood surged through his heart. He was startled in an instant. How could it be? He clenched this brocade pouch with his slightly trembling hands, his eyes jumping with longing light, flashing with surprise, horror, disbelief, bewilderment, ecstasy, and even sadness. Shizun. Chu Wanning. Why? Why did he keep this? End chapter.